Welcome back, everyone, to episode 3 of the Courtland, Minnesota 4X Mega Farm. We're back once again on this beautiful 4X map created by MRG Mapping. And today's going to be another huge day on the farm as we continue building momentum in this brand new series. We're starting off right where we left off, in our big Case IH Quadtrac 715, pulling the massive Vaderstad SeedHawk 980 air seeder. We're finishing up the final passes on our very first hay field, which marks one of the most important steps in setting up this new dairy operation. If you caught the last episode, you'll know things have been moving fast here on the Courtland Mega Farm. We've already spent over $8 million building out our starting fleet of equipment, from tillage to planting, hauling, and silage gear. Everything we'll need to run this large-scale dairy operation efficiently. After getting all the new equipment delivered, we wasted no time getting into the fields. We started by spreading lime and plowing to prepare our ground for planting, making sure every field is in top shape for this first season. Right now, we own 4 fields in total. 2 of them were bare when we bought them, while the other 2 already had corn growing that's just about ready for harvest. Since this series is focused on running a massive dairy farm, one of our top priorities is going to be producing enough grass, hay, and silage to feed all of the cows we'll be bringing in later on. That's why I decided to dedicate our first 2 open fields entirely to grass. Once we finish seeding this first field, we'll be heading across the road, where our John Deere 9570 RT is finishing up some last-minute tillage to get the second grass field ready. After wrapping this field up, I'll set up a Courseplay worker to handle the seeding on that second field, which will free me up to get started on prepping for something I've been really looking forward to: our first ever silage harvest here on the series. Now, those 2 corn fields I mentioned earlier might not be fully ready to harvest for grain yet, but they're actually at the perfect growth stage for chopping into silage. So, I'll be pulling out both of our John Deere 9000 Series forage harvesters, getting them hooked up, and sending them into the first corn field to start chopping. It's going to be a huge job, and we'll have plenty of hauling to do, but this will be the first big step in producing feed for our dairy herd. I'll also be experimenting a bit today. I'll be trying to automate some of the silage hauling process using auto drive to help our semi-trucks transport the chaff from the fields back to the bunker silo on the farm. It's a system I'm still learning, so I'm sure there'll be a few hiccups along the way, but I'm determined to get it running smoothly so we can make this operation as efficient as possible for future harvests. It's going to be a full day of work here on the Courtland, Minnesota Mega Farm. We got seeding, silage chopping, hauling, and bunker filling all happening at once as we continue building our new large-scale dairy empire from the ground up. So let's climb in the cab, fire up the engines, and get to work. If you're looking forward to this new Mega Farm series on Courtland, Minnesota 4X map, please like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.